Hello, everybody. Welcome to Storytime from the Milledgeville Public Library of Illinois. The story we have for you today comes from Europe, and it is a story about two sisters and how very different they were. This is a story called Old Mother Frost. Once long ago, there was a widow who had two daughters. Now, one of them was her daughter, and the other one was her stepdaughter. The stepdaughter was beautiful and industrious. She worked very hard, and she took care of the people around her. The widow's daughter was ugly and lazy. She didn't like to do any work, and she wasn't very nice to other people. Well, as often happens, the widow was kinder to her own daughter, even though she was not a very nice person. And she made her stepdaughter do all of the work around the house. In fact, what she would make her stepdaughter do most days, she would send her out of the house to make her sit on the side of the road as all the people went by and spin. And she had to spin and spin and spin. And she did it so much that her fingers bled. Well, one day, as she was spinning and her fingers were bleeding, they got so bloody that it got on the yarn. And she was sitting near the well, and so she went over to the well, and she reached into the well to rinse the blood off of the yarn, and she dropped the spindle, and it fell down, down, down into the well. Well, she ran back to her stepmother to tell her the terrible thing that had happened. And her stepmother said to her, "Well, if you've thrown the spindle into the well, then you have to fetch it out again. Go get it, you lazy girl." And so she went back out to the well, and she looked into this well, and she tried to see the spindle, but she couldn't see it. And so finally, she just jumped into the well, hoping that maybe she would be able to find the spindle full of yarn at the bottom. And when she jumped into the well, she fell down, 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 down. She kept falling so far that eventually she passed out. She lost consciousness because she had been falling for so long, and she was rather frightened at this time. Well, when she woke up, she found herself lying on the ground in a beautiful green meadow. And the sun was shining, and there were flowers everywhere in the meadow. She did not recognize this meadow. She had never seen it before. And suddenly she realized that somehow when she fell down into the well, it had taken her to a different place. Well, she didn't know where she was. And so she got up from where she was laying there in the meadow, and she started walking to try to find someone to tell her where she was. Well, as she was walking along, she spotted something in the distance. And as she got closer, she realized that it was a bread oven that was built outside, and there was a little table next to it for someone to put all the bread to cool off on. But there was nobody at the oven. And as she got closer, she could see that the oven was on. It was hot. There was a fire inside of the oven, but there was no one at the oven to watch the bread. And as she got even closer, suddenly she heard a voice coming from the bread oven that said, draw me out, or I shall be burnt. I have been baked long enough." And she looked around, and she didn't see anyone else nearby. And so she went over and she picked up the bread paddle, and she reached into the oven, and she took out all of those loaves of bread, and she set them on the table to cool. And then she looked around again. She still didn't see anyone, so she decided she would just keep walking. Well, as she was walking along, suddenly she saw an apple tree in the distance. And as she grew closer to the apple tree, she could see that the apple tree was covered in fruit. It was very heavy. All of the branches were bending low to the ground with lots of apples on them. And when she got closer, she heard a voice from the apple tree that said, shake us, we apples are all ripe." And so she went over to the tree, and she wrapped her arms around it, and she shook the tree, and the apples pelted down out of the tree and landed on the ground. And she shook it, and she shook the tree, and she shook the tree, and she shook the branches until all of the apples had fallen out of the tree. And then she gathered them all up, and she put them in a little heap, and then she kept on walking. Well, before she'd gone too much further, she saw a house in the distance, and she thought, well, certainly whoever lived in that house would be able to tell her where she was. And as she got closer to the house, she thought that there was someone inside. And when she got quite close, she saw that there was an old woman inside the house. And the old woman smiled at her. And she had such big teeth that it scared the poor girl. And she started to run away. But then she heard the old woman calling out to her, "Oh, don't run away. Please don't run away. I promise I won't hurt you. I don't mean you any harm. Could you perhaps help me? I need someone to help me in my house. I need someone to put it all in order, to clean it all up for me, and to make everything go smoothly in the house, and make my bed well, and shake it very strongly so that the feathers fly, for then it will snow upon the earth. You see, I am Old Mother Frost." And she spoke so gently and so kindly that the young girl thought this didn't sound like a bad thing. And perhaps Old Mother Frost would be willing to let her stay if she did a good job. And Old Mother Frost said she would. And so the girl came into the house, and she helped Old Mother Frost to clean it up and to do some of the cooking. And every time she made the bed, she shook it really well so that the feathers flew and the snow fell on the earth. Well, after a while, even though her life was very good and much better than it had been at her home, she started to feel, not right somehow. It took a little while, but eventually she figured out that what she was feeling was homesick. Her life had not been the best at home, but she missed her stepmother and her stepsister. And so she went to Old Mother Frost and she said, "Old Mother Frost, you've been very kind to me, but I feel like I need to go home and to make sure that my stepmother and my stepsister are all right. It's been a very long time since I've been there, and I just need to make sure that they're okay and to see them and to say hello. I miss them." And Old Mother Frost said, "Well, I knew you wouldn't stay with me forever. I knew you would have to go home eventually. So come with me, child." And she took her by the hand and she drew her over to a very big door in the wall, which the young girl had never really paid attention to before. And she said, "All right now, child, you go through this door and you'll be back home." So the young girl went through the door. And as she went through the door, a shower of gold fell down on her so that she was quite covered in this stuff. And when she came out the other side of the door, she found herself in a clearing just near her house. And so she ran home to her mother. And because she was covered in gold, of course, her mother welcomed her home very happily. And she sat her down and they gave her some food and they talked about what had happened and where she had been for all this time. Oh, and Old Mother Frost had given her the spindle that fell into the well, so she was able to give that back to her stepmother as well. Well, after she had finished telling the story, and the stepmother had praised her and sent her to bed to have a nice little rest after all of that work, she spoke with her stepdaughter, and her stepdaughter said, "Mother, Mother." Her own daughter said, "Mother, I want to go there too and get the gold. I want the gold shower." And her mother said, "Well, I think that's a very good plan, my dearest sweetheart. Now, here's a spindle, and go out by the well and spin some, and then throw it in the well and jump in after it." She said, "Well, it has to be bloody, Mother." And so she took a long thorn and she poked her finger and she rubbed it on the yarn. And then she went out, and she was so lazy she didn't want to spin at all. So she just threw the spindle into the well and jumped in after it. And she fell down, 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 down. And when she lost consciousness. Eventually she woke up and she was laying in the beautiful green meadow with the sun shining above and all of the flowers spread out around her in the meadow. And she got up and she started to walk. And pretty soon she got to the bread oven. And the bread oven called out, "Draw us out, or I shall be burnt. I've been baked long enough." And she said, "Are you kidding? If I go anywhere near that dirty oven, I will get all dirty. I don't think so." And she kept on walking. And pretty soon she came to the apple tree, and the apple tree called, shake us, we apples are all ripe." And she said, "I don't think so. If I shake you, one of you might fall down and hit me on the head. I will certainly not do all of that work." Well, as she kept walking, she came to the cottage with the old woman in it, and she was not terrified of the old woman's big teeth, for her stepsister had told her all about them. Well, she was told the same thing by Old Mother Frost. "If you will put my house in order, all shall go well with you. When you make the bed, be sure you shake it well so that the snow will fall on the earth, for I am Old Mother Frost." And she said, "Well, I most certainly will." And on that very first day, she worked quite well, and she cleaned the house and she put things in order, and she shook the bed very well, and the feathers flew and the snow fell on the earth. But on the second day, she didn't clean things quite as well. And when she shook the bed, she only shook it a little bit, so the feathers didn't fly and the snow did not fall on the earth. And on the third day, she barely shook the bed at all, and she really didn't clean much. And on the fourth day, she wouldn't even get out of bed. And after a few days of this, Old Mother Frost decided this girl wasn't worth anything, and she told her it was time for her to go home. And the lazy girl thought, "Oh, goodness, yes, this is wonderful. Now comes the shower of gold." And so Old Mother Frost took her to the door, handed her her spindle, and said, "Go through the door and you will return home." And she was so excited to go through that door that she went through it very slowly, so it was more and more and more gold would fall on her. But when she went through the door, it wasn't a shower of gold that landed on her, but rather a shower of pitch, tar, that showered down over her and stuck to her, dripping off of her back and sliding down off of her hair. And so she went home to her mother, all covered in tar and dirty. And her mother, well, she tried to get her clean, but she never did get all of the pitch off of her. It stuck to her for the rest of her life. And her sister, with her golden shower, she was treated a little better after that. And that is the story of Old Mother Frost. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you'll come back and join us again on Wednesday at 3 p.m. Central Time. We'll have another story for you from somewhere around the world, coming to you from the Milledgeville Public Library of Illinois. Have a great weekend. Bye.